Oliver B. Huntington, 1823 to 1909. Autobiography, 1823 to 1839. TypeScript, HBLL. History of the life of Oliver B. Huntington. Also his travels and troubles. Written by himself. I was born in Watertown, Jefferson County, New York, October 14, 1823. I was brought up very strictly to keep the Sabbath, also be moral and honest, and deal justly with all my fellow beings. In the year of our Lord, 1835, my father, mother, one brother, and one sister joined the Mormons. In the year 1836, he sold his farm and moved to Kirtland in Ohio. We started October 1st, lay in Sackett's Harbor windbound 3 days, and when we did go, we had a dreadful storm until we got to Richester, Rochester. There we took the canal for Buffalo. At Buffalo, a steamer for Fairport, 12 miles from Kirtland. Arrived in Kirtland 4 days from the time we started. My father there bought a small farm for $3,000 and paid the money down. Finally lost it all in that farm and became a poor man. Stayed there 2 winters, in the which time I went to school, the best part. As a people or family we were respected, although I say it. My father was first an elder, then a high priest, and then a high counselor. About the 1st of May, 1838, we started for Missouri. Had a long and tedious journey. Arrived at Far West, Missouri, July 18, 1838. We stayed there a few weeks and then moved 25 miles to Adimondaman. There we lived through all the wars. I saw one man whom the mob killed and dug his eyes out with sticks. Also many others that had been wounded. In the time of the fuss, my father was commissary for that place. After we laid down our arms and moved to Far West, he was committeeman to see to getting some property out of Daviess County. In the spring of 1839, we left the state, being nearly the last family to leave. Landed at Quincy on the Mississippi River in Illinois. Stayed there 2 or 3 weeks, and then moved 60 miles up the river to an old city plot called Commerce, 1839 then, but soon called Nauvoo by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to which I belonged, having joined a few days after we reached Kirtland. That same summer, July 8, 1839, my mother died. I suppose from or on account of the persecutions of Missouri. At the same time, I was so sick I could not attend the funeral. I was sick until the next spring on the 6th of April following, which the church was organized by a general conference held at Nauvoo, 1840. My father was again put in high counselor. 1841, the next spring, having obtained a charter, organized ourselves into a city called Nauvoo. 2 of my brothers, Dimmick and William, were put in city constables. William, also city sexton besides constable. That year a military force was organized. Father was made captain of a company called the Silvergrays. He also had 4 sons who belonged to the band, one of which was the captain, the writer of this the cour-bearer. February 3rd, 1842, I went to learn the carpenter's trade. Worked 6 months and left. Soon after I went 30 miles to see my brother-in-law. He wanting to go to New York, rented his steam grist mill and carding machine to myself and another youngster about my age. Did well and quit in the fall or in a few weeks after he got to me. I then went to Nauvoo and went to school the rest of the winter. The next spring, which was that of 1843, April the 8th, I was ordained an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. About 6 weeks after I was ordained an elder, I started in company with my brother-in-law, Henry B. Jacobs, and Elder John Gleason, whom I had not acquaintance with before, on a mission to the western part of the state of New York. We found a man by the name of Casper going into the state of Ohio with a 2-horse wagon. He said we could ride there free and find our own provision. Least I forget it. I will here state that I was ordained under the hands of 2 of the 12 apostles, namely John Taylor and George A. Smith, nephew to the prophet. We started on the 30th of May, traveled 30 miles the first day, 1843, stayed that night with one Mr. Bagby, and slept on the soft side of the floor for the first time. A pretty good beginning, I thought. Started early the next morning and traveled 36 miles that day. Stayed with Mr. Romine. Used well and slept on a feather bed. June 1st, Thursday, traveled 42 miles and got turned out of doors once by a very rich man. Went on 2 miles and got in with a man who belonged to no church. After a little conversation, he got angry at something Elder Gleason said, and with a violent blow on the table, said we must not think such things loud in his house again. If we did, we would leave it quick. However, we stayed there that night. June 2nd, crossed the Mackinac River, passed through Mackinac Village, also through Bloomington Village, in all traveled 38 miles and got turned out of doors 3 times. Finally, a man by the name of Rives Cowden, a gentlemanly appearanced man, kindly received us. That night we had a dreadful wind and rain, which made it bad going the next day. June 3rd, found the streams raised by the rain and fences leveled by the winds. The roads were very bad, all day's travel only 30 miles, and stayed 13 miles from urban, and had fine nights rest on a hay mow in an old log barn for the first time. Sunday, June 4th, roads but a little better, traveled 30 miles, and put up with Mr. Shearer and slept in the haymow again. Rested quite well, excepting it turned off cold in the night with rain. Rained the best part of the day, which made the going very bad indeed. Crossed the big Vermilion River at Danville, and took in dinner about 2 miles the other side. Went a little farther, and for the first time in 5 years saw beech trees, which made me laugh heartily. Proceeded a little and crossed the state line into Indiana, just as we came onto the edge of a 4-mile prairie. About 6 miles from that, within sight of Covington on the Washburn River, we stopped for night and slept on the haymow after having traveled 30 miles. Tuesday 6. Crossed the Wabash pretty early. However, the ferry had bad luck in getting from the other side, which detained us about an hour, in which time the river rose about 6 inches. We were told it rose 6 feet the night before, on account of the rains the day before. We traveled 30 miles that day and stopped at one Mr. Gray's, preached considerable to them, and found them quite believing, enough so to give us a good bed to sleep in, which was thankfully received by us. Wednesday the 7th, crossed Sugar Creek at Crawfordsville pretty early on a very large bridge, which was nearly washed away by the flood. The waters were the highest than they had ever been known, and we that day had the worst going I ever saw in my life. Traveled only 26 miles, doing our best. The water was then high, but nothing to what it had been. Not a bridge from Crawfordsville to New Lebanon was standing, even old crossways on level ground washed up. Corn and wheat fields destroyed and fences carried off. One man said before he had 30 acres of corn, and after the flood he had 3 left, the remainder being covered about a foot with washed dirt. All this caused by about 6 hours of rain. The old settlers said they never saw such a flood in that country. It was that way all through the state because the rain kept just ahead of us. We traveled miles where the water had been leg deep on the level, as we could see by the fences. Stayed that night in Lebanon and slept on a haymow belonging to one Mr. King, a tavern keeper. Thursday 8th, the going was bad as ever. We got within 11 miles of Noblesville on Little Eagle Creek and found 2 brethren at work on the road. We then took all things into consideration. Our provisions were exhausted, the going unaccountable, horses worn out, our clothes dirty. Therefore, we thought it best for 2 of us to tarry and get recruited, one proceed and drive the team and help the old gentleman, as 2 could travel together better than 3. We therefore took the parting hand amid Brother Gleason, went on with the teams. Brother Jacobs and myself tarried to come on foot. We went that night to stay with Brother Tidrow after having traveled 11 miles that day. Friday, June 9th, Sister Tidrow washed our clothes. We stayed that day there and spent our time in singing and studying. Saturday we also spent to the best advantage. I felt truly thankful to God for the privilege of resting my poor body in the house of a friend indeed in time of need. Friday an appointment was circulated that on Sunday there would be preaching at Joseph Titterow's by a Mormon preacher so-called. Sunday the 11th, Elder J. read the 11th chapter of Hebrews and preached therefrom. Whilst he was preaching I thought I could preach well enough. After he got through I arose to bear testimony, but the heavens seemed as brass over my head. My feelings, none but the all-seeing I could discern or imagine. It being the first time I ever arose to address a public assembly, I was somewhat startled, my mind confused, and my confidence failed me. After meeting I grew worse and worse. My feelings were past being described by the human tongue. There were plenty of woods close at hand, and I soon sought the inmost recesses thereof to supplicate my God, and give vent to my feelings in a profuse flood of tears. Why I felt so I knew not, but so it was. I soon felt better and returned to the house. That evening we went home with Brother William Trout about 1.5 miles on our road. Monday, June 12th, the going extremely bad. Yes, I might say incredibly bad. so that we traveled only 16 miles that day, having passed through Westfield over Cesaro Creek, where we had to wade quite a piece on account of the high water, also crossed White River at Noblesville. Soon after, we put up with one Mr. John Osborne, where we were well treated. Here we saw mysterious things, not unlawful for man to utter, 2 at 1 and 1 and 2. Traveled 16 miles. However, they treated us well, and Christ says that the publicans and harlots shall enter into the kingdom before you. Scribes and Pharisees. Tuesday the 13th, passed through Strawtown and Andersontown by 1 o'clock, distance 20 miles. Stopped at Brother David Tuthington's and took dinner. He was gone to Cincinnati. His wife was a wicked opposer to truth. Therefore, we proceeded on our journey 8 miles, which made 28 miles that day, notwithstanding my feet were badly blistered, legs worn out, and above all things among strangers. Yet I had a friend who will stand by those who trust in him. Elder Jacob's feet were also badly blistered, his hips very lame also. Take us as we were, and we were 2 pitiful objects. Towards night we fell in company with a man going our road, a mile or 2. Brother Jacobs talked about right, and made him think he was a fine man, and then asked for lodging, which we freely obtained and thankfully received. We were truly sorely afflicted, and cast down for a short time, but calling to mind our business, I cheered up my spirits, remembering him who sent us. That night I got an old hat and sewed soles on my socks, and made moccasins of them, and wore them 2 days, carrying my boots, because my feet were very sore. His name I don't recollect. However, he did not belong to any church, and all the better for us, as he was not full of prejudice and party split like some sectarians. Wednesday, June 14th, started again sore as ever, passed through Yorktown and Muncie Town, and came to Windsor, where we received an invitation to stop and preach. It was pretty early, however we thought best to stop, as there had been no preaching in that place. We put up with Mr. McLaughlin. A house and congregation was soon made ready, and after having traveled 25 miles, Elder Jacobs preached to them from the second epistle of John, and did the subject justice. A more attentive congregation I never saw. Mr. McLaughlin used us like gentlemen, for which he shall have the praise and blessings of God, for it came in time when we knew how to praise it and truly needed it. Thursday, June 15th. Got a late start that day. Passed through Winchester about 1 o'clock. Also crossed the state line into Ohio, walking hand in hand, lifting our desires to God for his assistance and his power to be made manifest through us unto the convincing of many souls of the error of their ways. We stayed that night in Ohio at a tavern about 40 rods from the line, traveled 25 miles. The subject of our faith was soon brought up. Elder Jacobs defended it manfully. Soon a carriage drove up with 2 gentlemen, and I thought them one lady. The 2 gentlemen soon began to talk also, and about as soon got angry. Finally, Elder Jacobs told one of them he was no part of a gentleman, and at the other took it up and told Elder Jacobs if he said one more word, he would beat him till he could not see. He then replied, he thanked God he was in a free land, and I did not see as he trembled much, but certain it is he did not touch him. Friday the 16th, started very early with muddy roads, as it rained hard the night before. Traveled 5 miles and stopped at Mr. Frederick Ivesley's and took breakfast. The old lady was a fine woman, and had living with her a granddaughter, the most polished Dutch lady I had yet seen. When we came away, the old lady shook hands with Brother Jacobs and bade him Godspeed. Traveled on through Greenville 7 miles and took dinner with Thomas Hathaway. With him lived his father-in-law, a Baptist preacher, with whom we had some conversation. Traveled 25 miles that day and stopped with one John Pitzenbarger. Was very weary in consequence of its being very muddy and slippery. Saturday, June the 17th, the first thing we entered a 6-mile swamp, the worst I had yet seen at any time. After we got through the swamp, we came to a river, and if we had not come just as we did, we would have to gone 2 or 3 miles farther. For the boat was on the other side, and the men were just going away, but we called them, and they came and took us over free. About 9 miles from that we passed through Harding, 2 miles east of which we took dinner, had good going all day after we left the swamp. Passed through Sydney, which is quite a large village. Passed the village about 1 mile, and met a man in a 1-horse wagon whom we hailed and inquired the road, etc. I observed something in the hinder end of the wagon, which we soon found out to be a new patent for water wheels, the most powerful of any I ever saw, called the spire and lever wheel, performing 1,040 revolutions in 1 minute. After that came through Jefferson, and there saw a blind man playing the flute. Traveled 26 miles that day and stayed with a Dutchman whose son had 117 fits in 3 weeks. That night slept, Dutch fashion, on the straw bed with the feather bed over us, which nearly smothered me to death. Sunday, June 18th, shirt, shaved, and proceeded on our journey without breakfast. In a few miles we discovered a man trying to catch a horse in the road. He called for us to stop him, which we did, and in return asked him for our breakfast, which we received. However, whilst eating, he went away to meeting and told his wife nothing of what had happened. When we got through eating, we thanked her for her kindness to us, but says she, "I want my pay." We then told her what we had done and that we were preachers of the gospel traveling without money, purse, or scrip, as did the ancient apostles. She became satisfied and told us we were welcome. Started on and soon came to the Big Miami River, which was swollen to the overflowing of the banks on either side of the bridge, so that we had to wait about 12 rods. At noon we stopped to get dinner. Some excuses were offered, but finally a loaf of bread and plate of butter were presented to us in a chair. We ate and thanked God for that much. Elder Jacobs talked to the old lady, who had the fever, with the spirit and with power until she fairly trembled, and said she wished we had a better dinner. We shook hands together, and she bade us Godspeed. Passed through Bell Fountain and took the Sandusky Road. Came to Rushsylvania as tired seemingly as mortal bodies could be, and put one foot before the other. We were soon found out to be preachers and nothing to do, but we must preach after having traveled 26 miles. Elder Jacobs gave them a discourse that seemed to take good effect on nearly all. I then arose and bore testimony. Monday, the 19th, got most ready to go on our journey and went across the road to see a lady who was somewhat believing, and there saw a mammoth's double tooth, which was about 8 inches long and 6 deep and 4 wide on the top, had bad roads nearly all day. However, we traveled quite easy after preaching, because it seemed to give us new life. Crossed the Scioto River and stayed within 2 miles of Burlington with a man who had lately lost his wife by the milk sickness, as I afterwards found out. But they said it was the consumption, that there was no milk sickness within 3 or 4 miles of there. And that was the story told us all the way through the state of Indiana and to Richland County, Ohio. When we would get where it was not there but a few miles on ahead, and when we got there it was somewhere else. Traveled 22 miles. Tuesday, June 20th, passed through Burlington, Bossierville, and Little Sandusky, where we crossed the Sandusky River. Came on 6 miles and passed through Wyandotte. Also passed through Bucyrus, quite a village 1 mile east of which we stayed with a Methodist, making in all 30 miles. His name is Cole. We told him we were preachers of the gospel, but they did not ask of what denomination we were, and I know not, but they think we are Methodists also to this day. Wednesday, the 21st, had the best of roads all day, and also the sorest of feet and legs. Got within 10 miles of Mansfield and took dinner with widow Elizabeth Hoover. We thanked her, and left with her the blessings of Almighty God, that she might have wisdom and understanding to bring her little ones up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Then proceeded on our journey. Passed through Ontario, Newcastle, and soon came within sight of Mansfield, where we laid ourselves down under the shadow of a chestnut tree to rest our weary limbs. Mansfield is a beautiful little village seated in a valley, a memorable place for the imprisonment of the prophet Joseph Smith. Whilst in the village we found a man going on our road 7 miles and got the privilege of riding with him, which made us 34 miles. We then thought one good turn deserved another, so asked him to keep us overnight, which he agreed to, but rather grudgingly. In the course of the evening he told a number of Yankee tricks played on the Dutch people, such as he was, in Pennsylvania, knowing we were Yankees. Therefore when we came to go to bed, he put us up garret in a straw thing, and said why he did so was the women were afraid of us. Such usage raised my dander, I tell ye. His name is Mason and has a brother in Farmington, Illinois. Thursday, June 22nd, started by sunrise, passed through Ashland, and within 1.5 miles of Orange stopped and got breakfast. We told them we were preachers, but they did not ask of what sort, and so got the best breakfast I had yet seen on the way. We thanked them and proceeded through Orange and Waynesburg, 4 miles east of which we took dinner with William Ramsey. Had about as good a dinner as we had breakfast, blessed him in the name of the Lord, and proceeded on our journey. Within 4 miles of Jackson, where four ways met, we stopped to rest our exceedingly weary and worn bodies, for we were tired beyond measures and description. Pretty soon a wagon came along, and we got in a road 1 mile, which helped us a little. Got to Jackson about sunset, and that tired. It seemed as though my soul would leave my body after having traveled 37 miles. Elder Jacobs had a cousin there by the name of Delaska Coates, where we calculated to stop and rest 2 or 3 days. Friday the 23rd, spent the day principally in reading and studying the scriptures. Mrs. Coates washed and mended our cloths like an own sister. She is a very fine woman indeed. She looks, speaks, and acts enough like the prophet's wife to be her own sister. He also is a very fine man. Saturday the 24th, spent a good share of the day in study. That being St. John's Day. There was a great performance at Worcester by the Masons, which made a great deal of travel by there that day. Sunday, June 25th, as there had never been any Mormon preaching there. After much persuasion, Elder Jacobs consented to give them a discourse. Accordingly, he preached from the second epistle of John and gave general satisfaction. Monday the 26th, shook hands with them, bade them farewell, and started on our journey. Passed through Seville and Medina, 2 miles past which we stopped to get a drink, and they asked us to eat, which we did, with thankfulness in our hearts. After dinner, we entered into conversation with the old gentleman. Traveled 27 miles that day. The subject of the gifts was breached upon. He asked if the gifts were in our church. Elder Jacobs said they were. The old man, having but one whole leg spatting the other, said, "Look at that." Elder Jacobs said, "We read it as nothing but an evil and adulterous generation that seeketh for a sign." After a little other conversation, we bade him farewell and traveled on. After passing through Strongsville, we came to Albion, a few miles past which we stopped to a good sectarian and asked him if we could stay with him overnight. He said he was not well prepared for it at present, but there was an infidel at the next house who would keep us. So we went there, and says he, "Such as I have I freely give unto you." His name is Humphrey and lives 7 miles from Cleveland. His sister was living there, with whom Elder Jacobs had some talk, and she talked so insulting that her brother said, "Why you talk like a damned fool?" She was a Methodist. Tuesday, June 27th, rose just early enough to get a ride to Cleveland. Ran about considerable to get a passage down the lake to Buffalo. Finally found the schooner Jesse Smith, Captain Warren Roosevelt, going the next morning. We gave him 7 shillings to carry us and board us, and helped him load 12,000 staves, which took 7 hours. We worked each 7 hours hard, although we were hardly able, either of us, to set up. My feet were badly blistered, 3 on one foot and 4 on the other, one blister as large as a 2-shilling piece. Brother Jacob's hips were also very lame indeed, his feet badly blistered, besides being sick with a distemper which was then raging in Buffalo, and Cleveland. A man who just came from Buffalo said that 75 were buried in one day there, and that there was more sick then than in the time of the cholera. Wednesday the 28th, early, a sailor from the other side of the river called to our captain and asked if he had lost one of his hands. The captain replied, "No." "Why?" says he. "There was one around, just astern of us last night, a sailor that is a stranger to me." About 7 o'clock, the wind being fair, we hoisted all sail. In a little while I began to be seasick, and grew worse and worse until I could hardly sit up, but could not vomit, which made me the worse. Had a little sailing breeze until we got just opposite to it. We were left without an excuse, and stayed there until I went to bed, it being then about 4 o'clock p.m. A little after dark I went to bed, as sick as I wanted to be. All hands went to bed, also but the watch, or rather, the pilot. About 11 o'clock I was waked by a loud stamp on deck, attended with the doleful pilot's cry in the dead of the night. "All hands up, reef force and main sails." After a little I made out to get up, and behold the storm which had overtaken us. The winds did howl, whilst the thunders rent the air with their loud and terrific peals. The forked lightnings, fierce and vividly, flew from one end of the heavens to the other, and the liquid elements murmured as with the voice of many waters. I then returned to my bed, and realized that God was speeding us on our journey by those means, and that He was as able to preserve us on water as on land. I then commended all to His kind care, and fell asleep, slept well until morning, when I awoke and found our little bark, with all sail up and running before a strong breeze at the rate of 8 miles an hour. After running about 15 miles, we came to area. The wind raised with the sun so that we soon run at the rate of 10 knots an hour. I was somewhat sick, but soon vomited and got better so that he did not take much satisfaction. The wind blew hard all day so that we got into Buffalo. Just sundown. Slept in the vessel that night, which was enough to bread the colliery for its farthest distance from Cleveland to Buffalo, 200 miles. Thursday, June 29th, changed our clothes and proceeded to the foot of Main Street, where we found one Elder Coates from whom we learned there was a branch of the church in that place. He took us to Brother Miller's and from there to Brother William E. Folsom's, where E. Jacobs was taken violently worse and thrown onto his bed. Elder Coates and myself administered to him in the name of the Lord, and he got better immediately, so that he walked 1/2 a mile to Brother Brown's and stayed all night. Friday, June 30th, he returned to Brother Folsom's, being worse than ever. Saturday, July 1st, tried to start for Tonawanda, but Brother Jacobs could not walk to the canal. Sunday, July 2nd, he made out to get to the canal and found about just starting we got on canal boat and landed in Tonawanda about 1 o'clock. We then had to walk 2 miles, which brought him very near his grave. That evening I had to go back to Buffalo with one brother car on business, which took me all night, and got there just daylight. Distance 18 miles. Monday the 3rd, done, did my business, and returned on the packet Redbird. Tuesday, 4th, went in a wagon down to Niagara Falls, viewed the falls, and returned. That night I had a small chill before I went to bed, and a very high fever followed all night. I will here mention, lest I entirely pass over it, that on Sunday, soon after we came from Buffalo Company, Whitman, Jacobs, Elder Jacobs' uncle, one of the boys came in and said he saw a dead man in the river. He knew it was because he saw his gallowses. Accordingly, Mr. Jacobs and myself went to him in a canoe. He paddled, and I towed him ashore. We left him on the beach that night and did more than to fasten him and send for a coroner, who came the next day and held an inquest over him. The jurymen, of which I was one, brought in a verdict of accidental death by drowning. Elder Jacobs was also one of the jurymen. Wednesday and Thursday passed away without any remarkable occurrence. Friday, July 7th, I started in company with Elder Jacobs, his uncle Michael, and Father Jacobs for Johnson's Creek, where there was a small branch, whom Father Jacobs had raised up. Went to Tonawanda and took a boat, passed through Pendleton and came to Lockport, where we get off the canal and went 1.5 miles and stayed overnight with Brother Benjamin Hawkins. Next morning returned to the canal and proceeded on our journey. Saturday, July 8th, passed through Gasport and about 5 o'clock reached Middleport, where we stopped and held a meeting that evening and stayed overnight with Brother Boyne. Sunday, 9th, went 6 miles to Brother Brown's at the branch and held a meeting in his barn. Elder Jacobs preached in the forenoon and partook of the Lord's Supper in the afternoon, and in the evening held a prayer meeting. However, at noon Elder Jacobs and myself went 1/4 mile to hear one Mr. Starr, an apostate, expose Mormonism. He had a book of covenants which he read nearly all the time, and though he was doing more good than hurt, and so came away and left him. Monday, 10th, Elder Brown's brother-in-law carried us 9 miles on road back to Foss. We then walked 6 miles and came to Brother Neal's, who was worth $10,000. There we stayed overnight and enjoyed ourselves well. Tuesday, July 11th, concluded that Elder Jacobs and myself would tarry until the morrow and get our cloths washed, after which we would return by the way of Lewistown. Accordingly, we stayed and fared sumptuously upon the fat of the land. That evening we sang psalms, as Christ said, after which we retired to bed. Wednesday, July 12th, after some refreshments we gave them the parting hand about 10 o'clock. At noon we came to Lewistown on Niagara River, 7 miles from Lake Ontario. There I saw Brock's monument on the Canada side, which had been blown nearly down with powder by a villain who was then in prison for attempting to blow up a steamboat. Got within 4 miles of the falls, and there I saw the Devil's Hole, so called, where a British army overpowered an army of French and Indians, and with the point of the bayonet forced them off a precipice of 120 feet, where they were dashed to pieces or torn asunder in the tops of trees. 1 mile up the river we came to a great whirlpool, with which is formed by nearly the whole river, striking against a square bank. Within 1 mile of the falls we stayed overnight with Elder Jacobs, Uncle John Udell. Thursday, July 13th, proceeded to the falls. Spent the day in searching every crook and corner about the falls. It surely is one of the seven wonders of the world. A man may view them from morn until eve, and his mind is not satisfied. It is a scene, one which the narrow mind of man cannot comprehend. Stayed that night with Brother Jacob's aunt, Mary Udell. Friday, 14th, returned to Whitman Jacobs, having traveled 45 miles from the time we left here, just a week from or before that time. Saturday, July 15th, had a heavy rain in the morning, but it cleared off so that we started for Buffalo, or rather Lagrange, by the way of Buffalo. Reached Buffalo about 4 o'clock. There I found Elder Carnes just from Nauvoo on the way to Scotland. We then went to Brother Miller's and stayed that night. Sunday the 16th, went up to Brother Felsom's to hear Elder Carnes preach. After him, Elder Jacobs gave a short lecture, and after him I arose as a witness for Christ. In the afternoon, Brother Young, who had never been with the saints in Zion, delivered a discourse at Brother Miller's. After he got through, he found out there were elders there just from Nauvoo, and said if he had known it, he would not have preached before them. In the evening, Elder Jacobs delivered a discourse also at Brother Miller's. The house was crowded and a still larger congregation in the street. Monday, July 17th, started for Lagrange, where we were to meet Brother Gleason's. Got 4 miles on the road, and had to lay by an hour or two on account of the rain, after which we had very bad traveling all day. Passed through Jerusalem, 3 miles past which we came to Jericho, and there I found a man by the name of W.M. Beebe, who was half a Mormon, as a man told me before we got there. With him we stayed that night, and talked until 10 or 11 o'clock. His wife was a very hard and bitter opposer to the gospel. Distance 20. Tuesday 18th. After considerable conversation, Mr. Beebe, Brother Jacobs, and myself went out by ourselves, and he there said if we would come there in a few weeks and hold a meeting, he would go forward in baptism, to which we agreed. We then returned to the house, and found a great alteration in his wife, so that she bade us Godspeed when we started. Arrived in Lagrange just noon. Distance from Tonawanda 42 miles. Went that night and stayed with old Mr. Gleason, and found that John Gleason, the old man's son, had not arrived yet, although we expected him there a long time before. There we learned that we had passed 2 miles back on Brother I.R.Y. Sherman. Wednesday, July 19th, returned 2 miles back to Brother I.R.Y. Sherman's, who was a good old brother and had belonged to the church 10 years, still had never lived with the church, and he was not so rusty as one might suppose. Strong in the faith, and received whatever we gave him as doctrine. That evening we gave out an appointment for preaching the next day, and 4 o'clock at a schoolhouse close by. Thursday, July 20th, according to appointment, Elder Jacobs gave them a lecture from the 27th chapter 4th verse of Revelations. After him I arose and bore testimony to what had been said, and closed the meeting. An appointment was then given out for preaching the next Sabbath at Lagrange. Friday 21st, I spent the day in writing, Brother Jacobs in writing and going round to the neighbors, seeing and hearing what he could. He heard that one man said that if we preached in Lagrange we would get some spit in our faces. Also found that by the help of the Lord we had made quite a stir. Yes, we had kicked up quite a dust in so short a time. Sunday, July 23rd, at 2 o'clock Brother Jacobs preached at the schoolhouse, and I bore testimony at 5 o'clock. We held another meeting in Lagrange. Had quite a large congregation who paid good attention. Among the rest were 2 Christian preachers, one of which behaved not as a preacher ought. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday and Friday I spent in writing. However, on Tuesday, 6 wagons containing 40 brethren bound for Nauvoo stopped there and stayed that night. In the evening we had a prayer meeting, which did us all good. Not a day passed hardly, but there was more or less people came in to see us, by which means I hope we sowed some seed that may fall on good ground and bring forth 60 or 100-fold, as the Scriptures say. Saturday, July 29th, spent the day in studying the Scriptures and helping the old gentleman hay. Sunday 30th, according to appointment at 11 o'clock we repaired to the schoolhouse in Lagrange, 1.5 miles distant from Brother Sherman's where we stayed. Brother Jacobs spoke from the 3rd chapter of John 5th verse. Had an exceeding attentive congregation of about 100 people. As usual, I bore testimony at the close of his discourse. Opportunity was given for baptism, but none presented themselves, although numbers had told us they were convinced that we preached the gospel, but still they would not embrace it. One Mr. Bugby, a Christian preacher, agreed to be baptized on Sunday, the next day, but by persuasion was wrought upon to forsake the idea. Also one Lemuel Lewis and wife said they believed it was the right way, but still they would not do that which they owned to be their duty. Take the place and people in general, they are the strangest I ever saw in my day and generation. This Lewis is the man who was peddling gum in Willoughby, Ohio, where he was deceitfully led with encouragement of disposing of a large quantity of his hemlock gum into the third story of the college by a student. Immediately, he found himself surrounded by dead subjects with the doors all locked. Suddenly, he saw a man making his way towards him with a long knife, at the sight of which he made his way out of a window 36 feet from the hard frozen ground, upon which he lit, and the effects of which he will most likely never get entirely rid whilst he lives upon the earth. Monday, July 31st, Brother Jacobs went 8 miles to see Mr. Sidney Brown, who had some relation in the West that he was acquainted with. Nothing else transpired of importance. Tuesday, August 1st, spent the forenoon in writing and studying. The afternoon, I helped Brother Sherman make hay. Wednesday, August 2nd, went to Lagrange in order to give out an appointment for preaching, provided we could get a house, the which we did obtain. Whilst passing by one Mr. Howard's, a woman put her head out of the window and, laughing us in the face, said, "There goes 2 Mormon preachers." By the appearance of things, I thought we were as much of a show as 2 elephants or a rhinoceros with a long horn on his nose. Thursday, August 3rd and Friday the 4th, we spent principally in reading. However, in the course of the day, we went over to Mr. Lewis, about 40 rods distant, and there found one Mr. Millard, one of the devil's minute men, standing like a soldier of no sense at all to fight against truth and reason. He said he knew all about Mormonism and what it sprang from. It sprang from Masonry or the death of Morgan. That Mormon was derived from the word Morgan. He said he could speak in tongues and prophesy to him. So he said he would prophesy in the name of the Lord Jehovah that Mormonism did spring from the death of Morgan. I then asked him if he laid hands on the sick. He said his boy was sick last night, and he laid hands on him, anointing him with oil, also with salt and vinegar, and he got better right off. He also said he had taken up serpents and put them in his bosom, but always tied their jaws first. Also had taken deadly poison enough to kill 6 men out of the Docot saddlebags. Also, he said he had cast out devils, for when they got in his boys, he took a whip and whipped them out. Elder Jacobs asked him if that was the way the old ancients did, and he said it was. I thought he was the biggest fool I had yet seen, for he had crossed himself in his conversation a dozen times certain. Sunday, the 6th, in the forenoon went and heard Elder Lee, a Christian by profession, preach, or rather pervert the Scriptures. In the afternoon, Elder Jacobs gave them a discourse from the 11th chapter of Hebrews. After the discourse, a man arose and said he had heard some truth from the brother Mormon, but if he had the power the ancientry apostles had, he wanted to see some of his works. Brother Jacobs quoted Christ's words to him, "Nothing but an evil and adulterous generation seeketh a sign, and no sign shall be given, except the sign of Jonas the prophet, which was preaching to the Ninevites, and that you have had today in full." The gentleman sat down satisfied he could not be healed of his withered feet, then if ever. We soon repaired to the water's edge, and Elder Jacobs baptized Forvis, Lemuel Lewis, and his daughter, Harriet. Some of the members of the Christian church who were there acted ridiculous, on the account of which I heard 3 say they would leave the church the next fellowship meeting. After baptism, we returned home to Brother Sherman's and confirmed them. Monday, August 7th, spent the day principally in writing. Tuesday, August 8th, Elder Jacobs went to Lagrange and gave an appointment for preaching there the next Sabbath at 1 o'clock. Some said if we preached there again, they would have a scrap with us once certain. He told them they must be civil, or he would see what virtue there was in the law of the land. Others said, "Come and preach. We will stand by you as long as we have 1 drop of blood in our veins." So they were, all by the ears. Old friends became new enemies by turning a deaf ear to the word of God. Wednesday, August 9th, we went to Evans Center, by some called Jericho, and Elder Jacobs preached that evening, after giving the village or inhabitants thereof a thorough notification, and had but 12 hearers, which made me think of what old Paul said when he stood upon Mars Hill. "Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious." After meeting one Mr. Sturtefant, a young man, whose parents belonged to the church, came forward in baptism. Mr. Beebe said he would wait until next Sabbath, come up to Lagrange to meeting, and then be baptized. By so doing, peradventure might lead others forward who were strong believers, but afraid of persecution, as he was a very respectable man and a man of property. Tuesday 10th. Returned to Brother Sherman's and spent the remainder of the day principally in reading. Distance to the center and back 16 miles. Friday, August 11th. Spent the day in writing and reading. Saturday 13th. Held a meeting at Lagrange and Elder Jacobs baptized two, viz. William A. Beebe and Orilla Sherman of Dalrymple. Monday, August 14th. Agreeable to appointment, all the members in the part met at Brother Sherman's to organize a branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The conference was called to order at 9:30 by Elder Jacobs, who was appointed president of the same. Oliver B. Huntington was chosen clerk. The meeting was opened with singing and prayer by Elder Gleason, who arrived there on Wednesday the week before. We then proceeded to business. The president first arose and made some remarks upon the design of the meeting and upon the order of the kingdom of God. He then moved that Brother William A. Beebe be ordained an elder to preside over that branch of the church, seconded by Elder Gleason and carried by the unanimous voice of the conference. Brother Ira Sherman was nominated by Brother Beebe and seconded by Elder Gleason to be ordained a teacher, which was also carried without a dissenting voice. Elder Jacobs and Elder Gleason accordingly proceeded and ordained them, after which the president read some of the church laws as laid one in the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, and explained them plainly unto them, with much good instruction thereupon and upon the Scriptures. He was followed by Elder Gleason, who made many very appropriate remarks. Elder Beebe then arose and said he felt himself incompetent of the task which laid before him, but was determined by the grace of God to improve upon the talents which he had given him and magnify his office and calling. He was followed by all the brethren and sisters who expressed their warmth of feeling for the cause of Christ. The clerk then received the names of those who belonged to that branch, which numbered 13, viz. William A. Beebe, Ira Sherman, Lemuel Lewis, John Sturdifont, Stephen Sturdifont, Philip Lewis, Cornelius Phelps, Phoebe Sherman, Harriet Sherman, Wadey Lewis, Sally Francis, Orly Dalrymple, May Sturdifont, 7 of which Elder Jacobs had lately baptized. By the unanimous voice of the conference, the branch was called Brant Branch. The minutes of the conference were then ready and accepted, moved by the president, seconded by Elder Gleason, and carried that the minutes of the conference be regularly submitted into the authorities of the church at Nauvoo. The meeting was then closed with singing and prayer by the president Henry B. Jacobs. Oliver B. Huntington, clerk. Tuesday, August 15th, Elder Jacobs, Elder Gleason, and myself went down to Brother Beebe's at Even Center 8 miles, and Elder Gleason gave them a discourse in the evening which was well received, insomuch that 2 offered themselves for baptism. Wednesday, August 16th, early in the morning, Louisa Beebe, Brother Beebe's wife, was baptized by Elder Gleason, and Walter Davis was baptized by Elder Jacobs according to previous arrangements we started, soon after confirming them, for Niagara Company, near where Brother Jacob's father was laboring. However, in the course of the day I concluded to go with Brother Gleason over to Canada, where his brothers, Alvirus and Oliver Gleason, lived, and get some washing, mending, etc. done. We crossed the Niagara River 3 miles below Buffalo at Black Creek on the American side, and Waterloo on the Canada side. After having traveled 30 miles, we stopped for night at 8 o'clock in the evening. Rested very well that night, it being the first night I ever slept out of the Dominion of the U.S. Thursday 17th, traveled 30 miles, and arrived at Alvirus Gleason's with very sore feet and weary limbs. Friday I read the Bible and wrote some in my journal book. Saturday, August 19th, went 12 miles west to see Oliver Gleason, who was once a Latter-day Saint, but had lately joined the Baptist Church for the sake of a wife, I suppose, for I could see nothing else he should do it for. However, he said he believed the work was true then as much as he ever did, and meant to come back again. Sunday 20th, returned back by the way of the Welland Canal, which is raised about the level of the land in general, and in places has at times broken away and let the water deluge great tracts of land. Wherever the water has been, the timber is all dead, which presents a doleful appearance. The land is very low and level about there, which makes it quite sickly in warm weather. For 7 miles, it was one continued tamarack swamp, the first I had seen in nearly 7 years. Monday, August 21st, spent the day wholly in writing and reading. Tuesday, 22nd, made a bargain with Mr. Gleason to work for him and get a pair of new pantaloons and my boots mended, so I helped him thresh wheat that day to begin with. Wednesday, 23rd, we finished threshing. Thursday, 24th, Brother Gleason and I went to Oliver's, his brother 11 miles distant. On our way there, as we were traveling on the bank of the Welland Canal, I espied two very large deer standing in the water's edge. We walked on towards them until we got within stone throw of them, when they ran off. They were the first I had seen since I left Nauvoo. Friday, 25th, in the morning we gave out word that there would be preaching by a Mormon, so-called, at Oliver Gleason's house, by early candle lighting. Accordingly, when evening came, the room was filled as full as they could comfortably sit, and for the first time I took the lead of the meeting and preached to them as well as I knew how. From the second epistle of John. The congregation paid first-rate attention and kept good order. After me, Elder Gleason gave them quite a lengthy discourse. Saturday, August 26th, returned again home to Alvirus Gleason's by way of the canals, and on our way, about the middle of the big Tamaracca swamp, we saw just ahead of us two black bears apparently anxiously looking to the other side of the canal. We proceeded until we got within good gunshot of them when they discovered us and ran off into the wood. They were the first wild bears I ever saw. Sunday, 27. An appointment was out for preaching at 1 o'clock in a schoolhouse in a place called the Bush. There was also a class meeting there at 11 o'clock, and Brother Gleason and I went to it and found the house full, but no one to take the lead. Accordingly, by request, I took the lead and gave them a discourse from the second epistle of John. In the course of my remarks, a man disturbed the meeting by replying to something I said. I requested him to just keep accordingly. About the close of the meeting, I gave liberty for anyone to free their minds that wished, but no one had anything to say. Therefore, we closed the meeting and returned home. Saturday, September 2nd, having worked all the week yet to do that for which we were sent, we walked 10 miles that afternoon to a place on the lake shore called the Clay Bank, and that evening I preached again. During the discourse, at the close, we gave liberty for any who wished to speak. Mr. Sutton got one Mr. Ayres to take the lead and said he would follow, but after Mr. Ayres got through, he had nothing to say and did not even bring up a thing, he had been so busily employed in writing through my discourse. After meeting, we heard that before we got there, some said, if we did not preach to suit them, they would haul us down out of the pulpit quick. I thought that sounded quite natural. Sunday, September 3rd, Elder Gleason preached at the same house, which was full and running over. After he got through, he gave liberty for any who desired to speak. Mr. Sutton, a good Methodist preacher, arose and said, I honestly think you are a perfect nobody, and went on with a long lingo accordingly. Finally, says he, if you are old Paul, smite me blind. Smite me blind, walking towards the pulpit, as old Paul did a certain man. I defy your power, says Brother Gleason. Do you put yourself in that man's place? I do, sir. Now smite me blind. I say unto you, as old Paul did to a certain man, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, thou art of thy father, the devil. At that the congregation laughed at him and appeared to go against him. M. Chambers, who was outdoors, put his head in the window and said to him, I would not make a blackguard of myself. He then went on to mock Elder Gleason as he did in his sermon. Alvirus Gleason spoke to him and said, You act like a gentleman to mock a preacher in public. You are a man. You are a fine fellow. You act like a teacher in Israel. I thought Mr. Gleason had ought to repent right off and ask God to forgive him for lying. The Methodist priest soon took his hat and walked out of the house, and we then dismissed the meeting and walked home that evening 10 miles. Tuesday, 5th. In the evening, after having worked all day, we went 2 miles, and Elder Gleason preached to quite a large congregation who paid good attention. After we had gotten home and standing out by the gate talking 4 or 5 of us together, we heard a company of people coming home from meeting, and one said, not knowing we were there, quite loud, if he was here, we would hang him across these bars. When they got about against us, M.A. Gleason says to them, Here he is. Try it if you wish. They did not say much, but paddled off fast as they could handily. Wednesday, I helped Mr. Gleason plow. Thursday, September 7th, started for Tonawanda by way of Niagara Falls. One Mr. A Quaker who lived about 2 miles on our road said we could ride down to the falls as he was going right there with a two-horse wagon. But I suppose he did not mean that we should ride any of the time. For when we got there in the morning, he was just ready to start and said we could not ride for he had to take in two other persons about 2 miles from there. But we inquired all along the road for 7 miles and found he had taken in no one yet, and I guess did not after that. So we had to go on our own understanding that day. Arrived at the falls about 1 o'clock, stayed and viewed the falls an hour or two on the Canada side, and then crossed the river just below the falls where the waves from the falls made the boat rock terribly. Viewed the falls on that side a short time, and proceeded up the river 8 miles to Michael Jacobs, where I found Elder Jacobs going to start for Nauvoo in a day or two by land, and his father the next day by water. I felt very glad to think I got there just as I did, and so went to bed quite tired after having traveled 30 miles. Friday I stayed there waiting for the teams which Elder Jacobs was going with to come, and trying to make up my mind whether to stay there over winter or go home. Saturday, September 9th, when the wagons came and Brother Jacobs got ready, I concluded to go to as far as Kirtland certain. Brother Jacobs and myself rode in one wagon with Brother Bell. I cannot say Brother Bosom Bark, but Asher Bosom Bark rode by himself in another wagon. Joseph Godfrey with Mr. Seeley in the other one, Ellis and George Coleman in another. That day we started and passed through Buffalo 10 miles west of which we encamped on the shore of Lake Erie, making in all 25 miles. Sunday, September 10th, traveled 16 miles and came to LaGrange where we stopped until Monday and stayed with Brother Sharon. That afternoon, we went to hear Elder Stoddard preach, who was appointed to preside over that branch in our absence, by a conference held in Buffalo whilst I was in Canada. That night we held a prayer meeting at Brother Sherman's. Monday, September 11th, gave our friends and brethren a long farewell and started. Traveled that day 37 miles, having passed through Silver Creek, Fredonia, Salem, and Centerville. Tuesday 12th, started early and traveled 4 miles when we came to the state line between New York and Pennsylvania, where we had to stop and get one of our wheels fixed. Also passed through Erie, traveled in all 30 miles. As yet we had the best roads I ever saw, and tolerable good luck, otherwise only a considerable grumbling and fault-finding among the brethren, about Brother Jacobs as well as myself. Wednesday, September 13th, started about sunrise and soon passed through Fairview, then Girard, then Springfield, and then Conneaut, where, or 2 miles east of which, we crossed the state line into Ohio. There we overtook 6 wagons from Akron, New York, going to Nauvoo. Traveled 37 miles that day, and at night one of the horses was taken sick and came near dying. That night it rained hard. Thursday 14th, started in the rain and had rain nearly all the forenoon. That day we passed through Unionville, Madison, Painesville, and reached Kirtland after sights of murmuring. Traveled in all 28 miles. It was with very peculiar and solemn feelings that I entered that place, and beheld those shattered and lonely dwellings which were once full and thronged with lively, enterprising, and industrious people, but now left desolate, and the streets grown up to grass. My feelings were again sorely wrought upon to look back upon my once happy situation in that place, surrounded with numerous friends, pleasing parents, and all the comforts of life, but now bereft of friends, far from my home, and worn down with my journey with hunger and want of repose. Moreover, my spirits cast down by the ill treatment of those who could and ought to have administered to our necessities like brethren indeed. They had brought me so far according to promise, and said they could take me no farther. Accordingly, I left the wagons that night to shift for myself. Went and stayed with Brother Daniel Jackson. Friday, September 15th, it still kept raining and was quite muddy. I also kept trying plans to get to Nauvoo, but all failed. Providence seemed disposed that I should yet linger out my journey with those on whom I was a drudge and could not help myself. But then, I knew not its design or disposition. That night I stayed with George Russell, my old schoolmate, but a Presbyterian. Saturday, September 16th, spent the day in running over town and hunting up my old acquaintance and viewing my former residence. Sunday, September 17th, held a meeting in the Lord's house, and Elder Jacobs preached. Brother John Young took our case in hand and raised a contribution of $2 or $3 for our assistance, without saying anything to us beforehand about it. After meeting, we divided the money between us, and I calculated I had enough to board me up to Nauvoo. Accordingly, I concluded to proceed with them. Monday, September 18th, bade farewell to Kirtland a second time in my life and started for the west. Passed through Chester, Russell, Bainbridge, and Aurora, 3 miles south of which we stayed overnight after having traveled 25 miles. Tuesday 19th, passed through Hudson, Quahog Falls, Akron, Newport Gauge, and stayed on the public square at Johnson's Four Corners. Traveled in all 22 miles. That day when at Akron, Brothers Seeley Godfrey and Martha Bosom Bark, in one wagon, was heedless and got left behind and took the wrong road that we saw them no more. Wednesday 20th, passed through Doylesville and Worcester 1 mile west of which we stayed overnight, traveled 22 miles. Thursday 21st, had very hilly going all day. Ellis Coleman's wagon tripped over with his wife and 2 children in it, but no one was hurt. We told them that was only a type of what would come if they did not cease their murmuring, bickerings, and fault-finding. Passed through Loudonville and traveled in all 23 miles. Friday, September 22nd, had very rough and hilly roads all day. Passed through Amity and Mt. Vernon, where I saw an old neighbor in when we lived in New York State by the name of Daniel McGrady, and 2 miles west of which we stopped for night. We had just encamped, and I was absent contracting for hay and corn for the company when Ellis Coleman raised a tumult in the camp by declaring that I should no longer remain in the company, but be left behind. When I returned, I soon heard the news, which caused my mind to recall all the sufferings and persecutions which I had received by those who rejected the gospel which I had preached, and to then see my brethren fall upon me, unjustly, made my soul seep with anguish. A meeting was soon called, and Brother Coleman required to make his complaint, which was in substance this. He believed that it was out of mere speculation or a speculative motive which induced me to perform this mission. Also, he said he had seen me many times when he knew I was hungry, had seen me go to bed hungry, and from morning until evening with nothing to eat. Still, he felt too poor to ask me to eat or to ride. Therefore, he had rather leave me than to have me under his constant observation in such a suffering condition, and not be able to alleviate my sufferings. This was his positive declaration, notwithstanding I had not been chargeable to anyone since I left Kirtland, yet he felt to meddle with me for fear I should. The meeting was attended by all except Asher Bosom Bark, who had $200 in cash, and who was the man who had never asked either Brother Jacobs nor myself to either eat a mouthful or ride a step. He went to bed. Brother Jacobs and Brother Bell plead my case like brothers indeed, and all said he had no business to meddle with me and that I should go through with them to Nauvoo. Surely his actions were not to be wondered at when we consider he was possessed to that degree that he denied Joseph Smith's being a prophet of God. Traveled that day 22 miles. Saturday, September 23rd, had pretty good roads all day. Passed through Liberty, Sinnersburg, Amity, and Sunsbury, for miles west of which we stopped for night. At Sunsbury, Brother John P. Green overtook us, but in consequence of the weariness of his horses was obliged to stop a day or two. Brother Bell, Jacobs, and myself concluded to stand by each other, and as his team could travel the fastest, our money's getting short, and could get none from any of the rest to go as far and as fast as we could whilst our money lasted. Altogether traveled all 24 miles. Sunday, September 24th, we started early and alone and traveled so all day, passing through Delaware and Marysville, where a dreadful shower of rain came upon us, after which we traveled on and passed through Milford, making in all 30 miles. Monday 25th, found one of the horses quite sick and lame, I suppose from torrents of rain which fell upon him the day before and the slippery going after the rain. However, we did what we could, and he got better in the course of an hour or two, at which time the other wagons overtook us, and we concluded that Providence said, "Keep together." Accordingly, we started and passed through Mechanicsburg and traveled about 22 miles over considerable bad road, and stayed within 5 of Springfield. Tuesday, September 26th, passed through Springfield and took the Dayton Turnpike and passed through Enon and Fairfield, making in all 22 miles. Wednesday, September 27th, Brother Jacobs and I concluded that it would be more agreeable for us and better for the company for us to go on foot and leave the teams either before or behind. Accordingly, we started very early and before the rest of the company, taking with us our valises, which were very heavy. Passed through Eton, Richmond, Centerville, and came to Dublin, where we stopped for night after having walked 35 miles. Friday 29th, passed through Knightstown, Louisville, Ogden, Portland, and came to Philadelphia perfectly worn down with our journey to that degree that when thinking upon the past, present, and future events and trying to conceal my feelings, the blood gushed from my nose in a stream. However, we traveled only 38 miles that day and stayed overnight with Mr. C. Atherwood, a tavern keeper. Whatever we got new came from charity, having given Brother Cal Bell all our money when we left but 20 cents to help along a family, thinking we could get along somehow. Saturday, September 30th, had very muddy and slippery roads all day. Passed through Cumberland and came to Indianapolis, where I got a loaf of bread and a quart of cider for a dime, which served as dinner that day and the day following. We then passed on, although it rained moderately hard. But soon we had to take shelter under a large beech tree when the torrents of rain came upon us, as with one mighty sheet. That was a day like many others, when it seemed as though the Almighty in his wrath was determined to destroy us with all the torments humanity could suffer. Sometimes I would think of giving up and not try to bear up under my daily afflictions. Again, I would muster all the manly courage and dignity my youthful mind was in possession of, and brave the torrents of unexperienced sufferings. Thus harassed between absolute and resultant motions, through grace I resigned that perseverance which eventually brought me to my long-wished-for home. That night we stayed in Bridgeport with Mr., whom Brother Jacobs was acquainted with. He treated us well. Traveled that day 26 miles as well. Sunday, October 1st, passed through Plainfield, Belleville, Stilesville, and at MT Meridian we stayed overnight with Mr. C. G. Vanzant, a pretty fine man. The place is generally called by the inhabitants MT Misery. I thought a pretty appropriate name. Traveled in all 25 miles. Monday, October 2nd, passed through Manhattan and came to Pleasant Garden, where we took dinner with Brother Scott. That day we traveled 20 miles and waded 2 rivers or creeks, through both of which I stripped and carried Brother Jacobs on my back. Tuesday, October 3rd, started very early. Traveled 20 miles before 12 o'clock and reached Terre Haute. Stayed there until the next day. Wednesday, October 4th, our teams came up and crossed the Wabash River about 1/2 hour before we knew it. When we heard it, we started post-haste and overtook them in traveling 8 miles. Soon after we passed them, we overtook 4 teams, 2 of which had no load, and said we could ride, as well as not, therefore rode with them that day. Passed through Paris and stayed 2 miles, out on the great prairie west of Paris. Soon after we stopped, the brethren came up, and we all camped together that night, and nearly all succeeding nights until we got to Nauvoo. We slept in the barn. Traveled 22 miles. Thursday 5th, traveled 34 miles, the best part of the way prairie. Friday, October 6th, traveled 31 miles, nearly all prairie. Saturday, October 7th, we had ridden with those 4 teams, both companies keeping together, until now, when we had to take on foot again because of the rain the night before, which made it rather bad for man and beast. At noon, 2 of the brethren, Sauls and Madison, who had the best teams, took our things and left the company because they could travel faster. Brother Jacobs and I kept up with them, making in all 31 miles. Sunday, October 8th, passed through Rochester and Springfield, traveled 26 miles west, making in all 35 miles. Tuesday 10th, traveled 38 miles and stayed within 26 miles of Nauvoo. Wednesday 11th, traveled 26 miles and arrived at Nauvoo by 12 o'clock. Glad was I to see Nauvoo and my friends once more. Greater was my joy, 1,000 times, than any tongue can tell. After an absence of 4 months and 10 days, and having undergone such keen and heart-trying suffering as I never before realized, no, not even in all Missouri, to see myself safe at home once more, I could hardly believe my own tale. Soon after I returned, I went to work for my brother, William, who was sexton, and got some little necessary clothing. After that I went to Lima to see my sister, Priscinda. Stayed there about a week. Returned and commenced going to school November 18th to Mr. J.C. Cole. December 9th, 1843, the whole family joined together, took up and removed from the old to the new burying ground, my mother, Bishop Partridge, and Harriet Partridge. One item worthy of notice: my mother was in a state of preservation, her body embalmed equal to a mummy. Her size, form, and features were the same as when a living, her flesh as hard seemingly as bone. An unheard of instance in any country. After being buried 3 years and upward, without any preservative substance whatever, to remain entire, as when living. Soon after this, there was a public gathering in the city, in consequence of mobs without, and there I saw a man shot in the arm, with his own gun, an accident frightful to witness. January 5, 1844. Friday evening, 1844, according to a new order of God, my father called his family together and entered into a solemn and strong covenant, according to the order, which was too lengthy to insert here. Sunday, January 7th, joined the quorum of elders and had a very good meeting at my brother Dimmock's. Sunday, in consequence of illness, I did not attend the quorum meetings. Sunday 21st, all quorums and other meetings gave way and attended a general meeting at the temple with preaching by the prophet. I continued going to school through the winter and lived with my father. About the 14th of April, 1844 I started, according to previous engagement, for Lima Adams Company, to work for my brother-in-law, Norman Buell, at carding. I started very early in a canoe and had a prosperous voyage to Warsaw 20 miles down the river. There I sold my canoe and went on foot the rest of the way. Got there when they were eating dinner. 32 miles. One thing I will mention, that is about the time I went away, a day or two before, I took my first degree in masonry. May 1st commenced upon my contract to work for $10 per month, cash, which was quite an object then. June 2nd, came to Nauvoo, and on the 3rd was raised to a master mason. Not far from the 20th of June the well-known Mormon War, or it is so termed, commenced, which ended in the death of the prophet and patriarch, Joseph and Hiram Smith. About a week before their death, I went with a company from the Morley settlement to Nauvoo in defense of our brethren. The Sunday before their death the troops were all disbanded, and I with the rest returned home. I shall always mourn that I did not stay and have the privilege of seeing those martyrs after they were slain. However, I afterwards succeeded in getting a cane out of the box in which Joseph was brought to Nauvoo in from Carthage. I continued at carding until the last day of July, when I was taken very violently ill with the fever, was out of my head a day or two. In about a week my father and brother-in-law, H. Jacobs, came down from Nauvoo after me, but was too low to be removed. However, in about a week longer the fever was broken up, and on the 16th of August we started for Nauvoo. That brought on a relapse which came near taking me out of the world. Brother Brigham and Heber came in and laid hands on me and sealed health upon me. From that time I rested content that I should not die. I was ordained into the quorum of or body of 70s about the month of December, 1844. On the evening of the 21st of December, J. M. Monroe, R. Campbell, myself, and several young men were the actors at an exhibition gotten up by the trustees of the old library, started the year before that, but was then pretty much run down. This was to make a starting point for a revival, but had not the desired effect, for it was too far gone. After the performance was over, a number of the young folks stayed and danced about an hour. The next day, Brother Brigham blew up everything that had evil consequences attending it, and frequent exhibitions amongst the rest. Tuesday 24th, we all, that is my father's family except John, went to Lima to spend Christmas at my sister's, Priscinda, had an excellent time and returned on the 26th, Saturday, December 27th. According to previous appointment, we had a repetition from our other exhibition to give room for the old people. They were very much crowded, which made much disorder. When journeying the gospel to preach in a far distant land, I did meet kind and affectionate friend who I trust will prove true to the end. Unto thee now myself I address, so may God forever thee bless with blessings, in Zion thee crown in peace there thy life. May lay down, oh, may I in Zion thee meet a sister in Christ there to greet and faithful hold out to the Indies the prayer of your unworthy poor friend. Remember these lines from me, came in Oliver B. H. is my name. Whenever these words you do see and think they were written by me. A curious letter, purporting to have been written by Jesus Christ and translated from the Hebrew into the English language. Written by our Savior, Jesus Christ, and found 18 miles from Iconium, 53 years after our Savior's crucifixion. Transmitted from the Holy City by a converted Jew, faithfully translated from the original Hebrew copy, now in possession of Lady Cuba's family in Mesopotamia. This letter was written by Jesus Christ and found under a great stone at the foot of the cross. Upon the stone was engraved, "Blessed is he that shall turn me over." All the people that saw it prayed to God earnestly, desiring that he would make this writing known to them. and that they might not attempt in vain to turn it over. In the meantime, there came a little child about 6 or 7 years old, and turned it over without assistance, to the admiration of every person that was standing by. It was carried to the city of Iconium, and there published by a person belonging to the house of Cuba. On the letter was written the commandments of Jesus Christ, and signed by the angel Gabriel, 74 years after our Savior's birth. A letter of Jesus Christ. Whosoever worketh on the Sabbath day shall not prosper. I command you all to go to worship, and to keep the Lord's day holy, without doing any manner of work. You shall not idly spend your time in bedecking yourself with superfluities of costly apparel and vain dresses, for I have ordained it to be a day of rest. I will have it kept holy, that your sins may be forgiven you. You shall not break my commandments, but observe what is written and spoken with my own mouth. You shall not only go to the temple, but also send your manservants and maidservants, and observe my words and commandments. You shall finish your labor every Saturday in the afternoon, at 6 o'clock, at which hour is the preparation for the Sabbath. I counsel you to fast 5 Fridays every year, beginning with Good Friday immediately following, in remembrance of the 5 wounds which I received for all mankind. You shall diligently and peaceably labor in your respective callings wherein it has pleased God to place you. You shall love one another with brotherly love, and cause them that are baptized to attend worship, and receive the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper, and to the members of the church, in doing, I will give long life and many blessings, and your land shall flourish, and your cattle shall bring forth in abundance. I will give unto you many comforts in the greatest temptations, and he that doeth contrary shall be unprofitable. I will also send hardness of hearts upon them till I see them, but especially upon the impenitent and unbelieving. He that giveth freely to the poor shall not be unprofitable. Remember, he that hath a copy of this letter, written with my own hand, and keepeth without publishing to others shall not prosper. But he that publisheth it to others shall be blessed of me. And though his sins be in number as the stars in the sky, and he believe, he shall be pardoned. But if he believe not in me and my commandments, I will send my own plagues upon him and consume him, his children and his cattle. And in coming ages, when my saints shall arise in various regions of the earth, I will be with them when they go forth to baptize the nations in my name, even as I submitted to be baptized by my servant John. And I will bless my people in all their afflictions, and will strengthen them when persecuted by their foes, uphold them when nigh unto falling, and establish their feet even when walking in difficult and uneven paths. In the latter days, when the new Jerusalem, my holy city, shall be sanctified and consecrated on the earth, then the 10 tribes shall be gathered together as to one holy temple, and my glory shall be there, and their reward shall be great. And whosoever shall have a copy of these my words, and put their trust in me, and shall obey the ordinance which I have commanded, them will I deliver in times of storms and famine and pestilence. King Agabus, letter to Christ. I have heard of thee, and the cures wrought by thee, without herbs or medicine. For it is reported, thou restorest sight to the blind, mocketh the lame to walk, cleanseth the leper, riseth the dead, and healeth those that are tormented with disease of long continuance. Having heard of all this of thee, I was fully persuaded to believe these 2 things, either that thou art the Son of God, and performest them. Wherefore, I have sent these few lines, entreating thee to come hither and cure my disease. Besides that, the Jews murmur against thee, and continue to do mischief. I invite thee into my city, which is small indeed, but exceeding beautiful, and is sufficient for us both. The Saviour's answer. Blessed art thou, Agabus, for believing in one whom thou hast not seen. For it is written, they who have seen me should not believe, and they who have not seen me should believe and be saved. But as to the matter thou hast written about, I herewith say to thee that all the things for which I am sent must be fulfilled, and that I shall be taken and returned to him that sent me. But, after my ascension, I will send some of my disciples, who shall cure thy distemper and restore thy house. The above was sent us by a subscriber who had a copy in his possession. The letter explains itself, and our readers may take it for what it is worth. Ed. Inquirer. History of Oliver Boardman Huntington, written by himself. Compilation of short sketches and journals. Commenced December 10, 1845. I do not write this account of myself out of any speculative motive, to get gain thereby, or thinking thereby to beget to myself much honor or applause from anyone, for it will not probably be of great satisfaction to many, if any, until I am no more. Many times have I wished that my father had kept an account of his life, that I might look over it and see his bygone days, deed, and fortune, and never did he make the scratch of a pen towards it, until he had seen 60 cold winters, and as yet I know but very little of his life, not enough to make any record of, although I have a very short account written, but which is beyond my reach at present, if not forever. Like men in general, I presume to suppose that I shall have a posterity, and that may, like me, wish to know of their father's life, that they might view it, and perhaps profit thereby, or at least have the satisfaction of knowing it. This is one object that induces me to write, that my nearest kindred might know of their kinsmen. I write also for a satisfaction to myself, to look over my past life, dates, and events, and to comply with a requirement, oft repeated by the prophet Joseph Smith, that every man should keep a daily journal. I was born in the year 1823, October 14th, and passed the first 10 years of my life with perhaps nothing more than the usual carelessness and curiosity of childhood, being brought up thus far in the good old way of our fathers, with all the honesty and righteousness they had any knowledge of. But I would to God that gives laws to the saints of the latter days, that I had never known aught but their laws and ways. A few instances of curiosity might be mentioned prior to the time above mentioned, but I intend to make the subject of my narration commence about the year 1825 or 6 being the time that the gospel of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was first preached in our hearing, and from the time my parents came into the covenant, more particularly from which time to the present time my life has been spent in the work and among the saints. My birthplace and residence until the year 1836 was in the town of Watertown, county of Jefferson, and state of New York. My father's name was William, and my mother's name was Zena. They came from New Hampshire and settled in Watertown, where they raised a family of 7 children who lived to be men and women grown, and lost 3 whilst in childhood. Their names according to their ages are as follows: Chauncey and Nancy twins. Nancy died in infancy. Dimmock, Prescindia, Adeline, William, Zena, Oliver, and John. Adeline died when 11 years old, and also an infant of but a few days old. I cannot tell where he comes in among the rest, for he came and went without being called by any name. My mother was a daughter of old Dr. Oliver Baker of New Hampshire. Grandfather Huntington's name was William, and a nephew to Samuel Huntington that signed the Declaration of Independence. He served in both the Revolutionary War and last war. He served through all the last war and 3 years in the Revolution, and of that the last 3, enlisting when he was only 17 years old. My father also served through the last war as officer. 1812. In the year 1833 or 34 conversion, what was called Mormon elders began to preach around our neighborhood, and by some means finally came to our house, and left a Book of Mormon which they read through 2 or 3 times, and were very much taken up with the doctrine. There had not been much preaching about there, anywhere, but father and mother heard. Having a very inquiring mind, and being willing to obey truth, they soon were baptized by Elder Dutcher, and turned their whole attention to the work. I think this was in the fall of 1834, and the next spring, my sister Prescindia, who had married a man by the name of Norman Buell, and Dimmock, moved to Kirtland in Ohio, where the church was then gathering. I disremember whether they joined the church before or after they moved to Kirtland. They sailed in a schooner from Saskat's Harbor to Fairport or Cleveland. My father's house was a rendezvous for all the Mormon preachers in that part of the country. In 1835, old Father Joseph Smith and his brother John Smith were at our house and stayed a day or 2. Also Luke Johnson and Orson Pratt, Dutcher and Blakesley, and John P. Green, who baptized my grandfather. In fact, it was a home for all Mormons. In 1836, Father sold his farm, after much anxiety and concern, by sacrificing about $1,500, in selling it for that much less than it was really worth for the sake of living with the church and obeying the word of God, as given to Joseph Smith, and whose father had been to our house, and counseled Father to sell the first opportunity. He had, which he did in the summer of 1836, and about the 1st of October that fall, We started from Sackett's Harbor in company with Hiram Clark and 2 or 3 other families whose names I disremember, all being under the direction of and led by Luke Johnson and Orson Pratt, who had lately married him a wife about 20 miles from our place, by the name of Sally Bates. I will here mention that William and Zena were baptized that summer, and I think at the time they went down to Elder Pratt's wedding. I will not be positive, though. One day, as I was taking Orson and Luke down to my grandfather's in the carriage, we were passing a spot where, but a little time before, a thief had hid some money, and it could not be found. Luke said to me, "Hadn't we better go and try? I think we will find it." I, not understanding his meaning, replied, "I thought it not worthwhile to try." He said it was not, but Joe Smith was said to be a great money digger, and they were his followers. I often thought of that, and thought he was a cunning man. We left Sackett's Harbor, I think, the first day of October, having made an attempt to start the night before, but was driven back, the wind blowing a perfect gale. We landed in Rochester the next morning before sunrise. During our passage thus far, grounds of suspicion against a certain sister who had left her husband to go to the city of the saints were not unlikely, and therefore a watchful eye was justly kept over her and the man with a black coat by the name of Bennett, a strange passenger before unknown to her or any of us. But I suppose she knew him well. Before we left the wharf, from the fact that William and Orson Pratt saw them go into an inn together, where they soon found them locked in a room together, and the landlord had to be called to open the door, where signs were seen sufficient to warrant the authorities present to cut her off from the church immediately. From Rochester, we took the canal to Buffalo, and from Buffalo to Fairport. 12 miles from Kirtland, we sailed on a steamboat, and in 4 days from the time we left Sackett's, we were in Kirtland. We all walked the 12 miles with joy, rejoicing at the privilege of getting there no matter how. And oh, what joy again came over every one of us as we came in sight of the temple. "The Lord's house," solemnly exclaimed everyone, as we were trudging along in a confused flock. It makes me think of tribes going up to Jerusalem to worship, and anciently. When we got there, we found Prescindia, but behold, Dimmock had gone to Missouri 4 months before, 700 miles farther. Well, we were glad of it, only we wanted to see him, but did not know when that would be, but expected to sometime. Father went immediately and asked counsel what to do, and the counsel he received was to buy a certain place or situation just 2 miles south from the temple, containing 30 acres, and on it a good 2-story white house. He accordingly made the purchase of it from a man belonging to the church then, by the name of Jacob Bump, and paid him down to the amount of $3,000, the sum total. Well, we all were well satisfied and thought we were doing well if the land was high, and a mortgage on the place. It was in the hands of Brother Bump, and we thought all the brethren were honest then, for we did not think that some had come in for the loaves and fishes. In fact, never once thought of the possibility of a Mormon being dishonest or even denying the faith. 1 year had not rolled away, and Brother Bump had denied the faith and refused to lift the mortgage, and Father could not, having bestowed all his surplus money upon the bank and the poor. So when the bank broke, we were broken and as poor as the best of the Mormons. Well, we expected to become poor, but not quite so quick. About 2 or 3 weeks after we arrived there, John and I were baptized in the waters of Mormon by Hiram Smith, according to a covenant which I had made with God on certain conditions, which he had fulfilled, and so did I on my part. That winter I went to school to even Gree, and the next summer I had to stay at home and work. We all worked hard, and had to live, for that spring was the hardest time we, as a family, ever saw or ever have for provisions and stuff to save life. That spring was a general time of severity of all kinds of eatables, and it was the more so with us in consequence of having but a short time before we came from a farm of everything, and had spent all our money, and did not know how to beg, neither wanted to know. There was nothing to be had either for love or money for Mormons, when they had anything to buy with. Many a time did my mother go without her meal of victuals to leave enough for the children, when there was nothing but beech leaves, after string beans, and sometimes a very scanty allowance of cornbread to leave. Once in a while, when we were most starved out, we would kill a starved-to-death hen we had wintered over on nothing, and eat as necessity called hardest. My poor old father, who but 6 months ago was in affluent circumstances and surrounded with everything to make him comfortable and render life desirable, that a farm of upwards of 230 acres, a good stone house, and 2 frame barns could afford, with close calculation, together with a still greater comfort, which was as good a companion as any man ever chose, who in the midst of affliction was as an angelic comforter. I say from all these earthly comforts and conveniences, in 6 months he was brought to live by day's works, and that but very poorly. Still my mother was the same mother and the same wife. It was a torment to each, to see the other in want, and still more see their children cry for bread and have none to give them nor know where the next was coming from. And after all their trials and sufferings not only there, but elsewhere, never did I hear either of them utter a murmuring or complaining word against any of the authorities of the church, or express a doubt of the truth of the work. They bore everything that came upon them as saints worthy of the reward laid up for those that do not murmur, and worthy are they, and from my mouth shall they ever be called blessed and worthy. John and I, though small, felt for them as much as our age would and could be expected. We often would kneel beside each other in the woods and in the barn, daily, and pray to God to have mercy and bless father and mother, that they should not want nor see us want for bread. We used to pray 3 times a day as regularly as Daniel, and often more than 3 times. In those days we were humble and prayed every chance we had and for everything we wanted. We were full of pious notions, but our piety began to be a little different from the old way, and I used to delight in religious conversation in and among the family. And we finally obtained the gift of tongues, all of us, and Zena the gift of interpretation. And we all became exceedingly happy, even in the midst of our scarcities and deprivations. In the midst of our poverty in Kirtland, none of us complained nor murmured against any of the authorities of the church or against God. Neither was the faith of any one lessened. But as to the work of God, all was joy and content and satisfaction. When I say this, I say and tell the unbent truth before God. In 10 years' travel with the church, I never heard father or mother utter the first expression of doubt or show the least wavering of mind or lack of unlimited confidence in the prophet. In the fall of 1837, father was chosen, ordained, and set apart for the office of High Counselor, one of the standing High Council. That winter he underwent a partial endowment and passed through the ordeal or ordinances of washing and anointing. In the spring of 1838, Joseph and the most of the more conspicuous characters having gone to Missouri, we determined to go with the church, which was pretty much all going in June or July. The fall before the endowment there, the devil kicked up a great row in the hearts of many who turned away and denied the faith, and became the most bitter enemies of the church, and used to try every means to make a disturbance among the brethren, every day of the week, Sundays not excepted. I remember one Sunday of seeing men jumping out of the windows. I ran to see what the fuss was, and found the apostates had tried to make a real muss, as they had frequently tried before, but on this occasion I saw a dagger, the doorkeeper held, that was wrenched from one of their hands whilst making his way to the stand. I heard the women scream, and saw the men jump out of the windows, those that had chickens' hearts, and I shall always remember the sensation that came over me. A few weeks after that, Joseph received a revelation to go immediately to Missouri to move him, and Sidney and Hiram, I think, started the next day, or in 2 or 3 days at most. Immediately upon their departure, persecution commenced with an iron hand. It was the life and glory of the apostates to hatch up vexatious lawsuits and strip the brethren of their property and means of removing. It seemed as though all power was given them to torment the saints. The real Mormons were designated by the appellation of lickskillets, and every lickskillet had to suffer. The principal ones left were hunted like rabbits and foxes who skulk and hide in holes, and so did they. Numbers lay concealed in our house day after day, until their families could be got out of the place. One after another would come and go until we had served a variety with the best we had, and were glad of the privilege of showing favor to the righteous, among which number was Benjamin Wilbur, Lyman Sherman, Old Father Smith, Samuel and Carlos Smith, and even the mummies were secreted there to keep them from being destroyed. And in the meantime, father was working out to get $50 for nothing, only to satisfy the demands of the devil on him and screen him from hiding as the rest had to. But their spite towards him did not run high as on others, some of whom they sought their lives by day and night. Well, all served one scene of affliction to another that they might be more fully tried before they had got settled in Missouri, and so they were driven from thence, like the people of Enoch. Father having borrowed money and a yoke of oxen, we started for far west, in Missouri about the first day of May 1838. We had one yoke of oxen on a double-loaded two-horse wagon, and an old horse on a one-horse wagon with a double load. Thus we traveled 15 miles the first day to Father's cousin, McCarr, in Bainbridge, where we unloaded all of our best goods, and everything but just what we really needed to make us comfortable on the road, and left them with him to send on by water, which we expected would be there before we would. This we did, finding our loads too heavy, so that we might be able to go through the quicker and easier, but we never saw anything more of our goods, which left us as bare as a sheared sheep. We had the hide left, but not whole, and all that change wrought in 2 years. Our route to Missouri was from Kirtland to Akron, and then to Worcester, Columbus, the capital of Ohio, Springfield and Dayton, Indianapolis, the capital of Indiana and Tarrahene, Springfield, the capital of Illinois, and at Lap, Louisiana, and Kettisville in Missouri. Our pilgrimage to far west, was like the journey of the children of Israel in the wilderness. Everything was uncertain but one, and it was but by the hand and power of God that we ever got to our place of destination. That journey, in that season of the year, with an ox team to travel 1,000 miles, can be realized by none but they who have performed similar journeys under similar circumstances. Our whole journey was through a scene of new and before unexperienced and unthought of events. We were in company of 7 wagons led by Oliver Snow, and whose cattle we had, and through whom God blessed us with means to get to the place of gathering. Brother Snow was a man very much respected among men and as man of good sense, abilities and fortune, but he happened to prove to be one of the more unfortunate, for soon after we arrived at far west, he became somewhat disaffected and finally turned aside altogether, and in fact he showed strong symptoms of the darkness of his mind. On the road, it was surely a true saying among the Latter-day Saints, that if you want to know a man fully, take one good Mormon journey with him, for it is sure to prove anyone, whether he be true or false, half or wholehearted. It sufficeth me to say, and cut my notes short on our journey, that through a great school and series of lessons taught by that hard schoolmaster experience, we arrived at far west, in Missouri on the 18th day of July, 1838. When about 10 miles from far west, as John and I were walking ahead of the teams, who should we meet but our brother, Dimmock, who we had not seen for near 3 years, and who had got to be as fat as a bear. Prescindia had moved into Clay County, and it was some time before we saw her. They came up the best part of the way with Brother Joseph. We arrived there a few days before, or about the time of the commencement of the long to be remembered disturbance which ended in the extermination of all Latter-day Saints from the state. We stayed in far west city, until sometime in August, during which time, through the melon season, we fared and shared bountifully from the generosity of our benevolent neighbors. I think it was in August, but it might have been in September that we moved to Adamandiaman in Daviess County, where there was a stake commenced. There have been so many books written upon the Missouri persecutions that I shall confine my observations upon our own family, and self more particularly. We had heard and read so much about the sufferings of the brethren in the time of an excitement, that we had made up our minds for harder things than we found. Not but we found things and times hard enough for American citizens to bear. The fuss had fairly commenced, and under considerable headway when we moved, insomuch that father, mother, and Zena, who went in the hind wagon, and who were until dark before they arrived there, were assailed just before they got to the Mormon inhabitants by a band of armed and mounted men, who stopped them and in a very rough and barbarous manner, like real natives, demanded their business, names, and some other information, gave a good sound damning, and then rode off into the woods, the most natural place for such animals. Soon after our arrival there, the fuss grew hotter and heavier, with a seeming renewed vigilance on both sides, one to offend and the other to defend. We were besieged in that weak place by a secret skulking foe, but a good reinforcement from far west, cleared the ground for a space around. In the meantime, the brethren created a grist mill in the town or village, and father was appointed overseer of that in the fief market, or rather, in short, all the brethren were put on allowances or drew rations, and he was commissary general, and had the charge of all the meat, honey, and brate timber, both consecrated and not consecrated. Under these circumstances, living in a log house of our own, and 5 acres of land, on the bottom land of Grand River, 1 acre of which was devoted to burying the dead on, all being covered with large timber, like the rest of the settlement. I say under these circumstances, having or living in our own house, which cost only rolling the logs together, the floor being made of God's footstool, and no door, we were quite happy that we could get corn and hog enough to make us know that the earth was the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Our wants were mostly supplied, not because we had so much, but because we had learned to lessen our wants. Open hostilities had previously commenced on both sides, by the mobs burning 1 or 2 houses and committing several outbreaks upon the brethren in the country around. Notwithstanding, I was young and out of danger that the men were exposed to. Yet I feared it not, for it was my natural turn to glory in excitement, campaigns, and something new. And then was the time my curiosity was measurably satisfied, for every day almost brought fresh news of some new outrage and outbreak on one side, and the next would be a signal revenge or victory on the other. Yet my desires were not satisfied, for I wished and desired to be in the midst of the scene, and often in vain spent tears, implored my father to let me go with the scouting parties. I was always an obedient boy, and wanted to do everything by his consent, and it was seldom that I did anything of consequence without. At the time that Gallatin was to be burned, I pleaded with father to let me go, but to no effect. On the appointed day, I went to the top of the hill, a little above the well-known pile of burnt stones, half covered with earth, which the prophet said was the remains of an ancient altar, even an altar that Adam built, and stood nearly on the spot where he also said, once stood Adam's tower, in sight of the spot in the valley where Adam blessed his sons, when they called him Michael. I say I stood there and cast my eyes in the direction of Gallatin, as near as I could judge, and saw the smoke rising towards heaven, which filled me with ambition, the love of excitement, tumult, and something new. In tears I looked far over the trees and sighed and wished again that I was there, and that I was older, for then I thought father would not attempt to stop me from going when I pleased, and with mingled feeling of madness and sorrow, I stood alone on the prairie and cried. The next day I went to Bishop Knight's and saw the plunder, and oh, what lots, I thought, and heard them tell, in what order they took the place, marching up on the run, and one man who was in such a fright to save his life, that he ran from the store to his horse, and on his way, pulled out his knife, and instead of untying his horse, out the reins, mounted and dashed into the woods out of sight, in almost the twinkling of an eye. The store they burned, but the goods were preserved. Soon after, Dimmick came to our house, and I heard him telling a circumstance that happened with him, which was this. Just before they came in sight of Gallatin, he saw a man at a distance on the prairie on horseback with a gun on his shoulder, and immediately rode up to him and asked him his business, which he said was hunting cattle. He had a handkerchief around the lock of his gun, it being a misty and damp day. Dimmick cocked his gun and, raising it, ordered him to surrender his gun, and he would spare his life. Otherwise, the least resistance would be death. The man handed him his gun but requested the handkerchief, which Dimmick gave him, and ordered him to proceed, which he did at the top of the speed of his beast. After we had lain down our arms, I saw a man looking among the brethren, for a man, whose description answered for Dimmick, saying if he could just see him, he asked no more, and related the above circumstance as having happened to him. But Dimmick at that time was far among the Lamanite, making his way for Illinois, where he arrived after having been among the Indians 5 days, and of which he lived on raw deer's tripe that he bought of an Indian. There were 3 or 4 brethren with him. They happened to have got out of far west, about 15 minutes before the place was surrounded by the militia, by the advice of Hiram Smith. On their way, they visited the grave of Black Hawk, and crossed the Mississippi River at or near Appanoose, from thence to Quincy, where they made a stop. Adamondiaman is 25 miles from far west, and situated in a large bend of Grand River, the whole settlement being nearly surrounded, and a high point of prairie following into the bend, at the proportional height and distance from the river, with the bluffs in general, and on this point, the very extreme point, is the remains of the altar before mentioned, and little farther up, perhaps 40 rods, was the place where the tower stood, both being on the prairie. A little within the medium course of the river the point divided, and the other half was covered with timber, at the very foot of which stood our house, or pen of logs, without any door, but a blanket, nor floor, but the richest of soil trod hard, being used for a kind of guardhouse by the soldiers, before we moved up. Father having built it some time before we moved. When we moved, things had come to rather a singular crisis as to the affairs between Mormons and mobs. Both seemed to be mutually agreed to rob and plunder all they could. At least the mob commenced it, and knowing that the governor would do nothing for us, they must have known or naturally expected that we would not be idle, and the brethren being principally Yankees would have the better of them in almost everything. Diamond, as we called it for convenience sake, being the weaker place and more in the immediate vicinity of the mob, we were besieged on every side, and were obliged to keep a standing army, or companies sent us by the brethren of far west. Their camping ground was close by our house, and I have lain on the floor night after night for nearly 2 weeks in giving my bed to sick soldiers. I had often heard father and mother say they expected to be poor, for all were destined to become poor that came into the last covenant and church of Christ. That was their belief, and they murmured not at their lot. Then I realized what I once feigned. Whilst in Kirtland, hearing our folks telling about our being poor, I one day dressed up in the worst-looking cloths I could muster and went down into the village to see how it would seem. On returning home, an old lady and her son, a little older than myself, in a carriage overtook me, and seeing my pitiful conditions, began to talk to me about being so poor, asking me a good many questions, and appeared quite sorry for me. All the while I could hardly keep from snorting out laughing, but still pretending great poverty. I finally told her I had better cloths, and then they asked my name and drove on. I afterwards experienced a reality of the condition I feigned to be in. Whilst in Missouri we were poor, but never suffered for something to eat, for we always had a plenty of meat and cornbread and meat, all the time with only now and then a pail full of consecrated honey which every one that ever ate any of it knows is good. Whilst things were going on in this kind of confused state, everyone knew that things must soon come to a crisis, yet in what way we could not tell. It will be well to state that in the commencement the brethren had their houses burned, a few, and property confiscated, which complaint went to Governor Boggs, who sent a detachment of 500 men, I think under General Donathan, who went to Diamond and stayed 30 days and ate everything the brethren had, killed their cattle, etc., protecting them, and then left with the news that we must fight it out among ourselves. They left a few days before we moved up there, and from that time we tried to defend ourselves, and for which we were driven by executive authority from the state. Some might ask, why did we take their cattle, sheep, honey, etc.? But as far as this, it is plain and evident that when they had taken ours and driven all the farmers, or nearly all, into the cities and besieged us round about, that whoever went without must go in the night secretly or by a sufficient force to repel all invaders, that we must live, and as we were at open hostilities with each other, we must have the privilege, or take the privilege of retaking as much as they took from us. Or in other words, we must live in war, we must have something to eat. The brethren were united, and whatever they undertook, they accomplished, and in one could hinder. They were mighty with the power of God, for his Spirit is always with them when they are humble and united. And if ever the time is or was that they will be humble, it is when they are persecuted, tormented, afflicted, and hunted by their enemies, even unto death. November 28th or 29, 1838, all the forces that could be raised with entirely defenselessly leaving the place went to far west, at a call from there, as all the mob of Daviess County had gathered in Caldwell or Ray counties, and I disremember whether it was before or after the battle at Crooked River, in which David Patton was killed with 2 others and several wounded, that the brethren went down to far west. At any rate, I am pretty sure it was the day after they arrived there, that the massacre at Haun's Mill was, which memorable days or deed was on the 30th of October, and the surrender of far west, was on or about the 1st of November, 1838. It was several days after the surrender before we could hear from there. The city was closely guarded. The first news was that Joseph and Hiram were betrayed into the hands of Generals Lewis, Clark, and Doniphan, who were at the head of 3,000 men, who surrounded far west, which was in Caldwell County, and that the church was going to have the state, and that if we as a people did not leave the state by next spring, the governor had ordered us all to be killed. This was dreadful news, and came like deafening peaks of thunder. Yet in one doubted it, for all had been looking for some decisive event, either for or against the church. However, I cannot say that this was against the church in the long run, for all things do work together for their good. Far West, had laid down all its personal and private arms, and lay at the mercies of God, perfectly passive, and entirely in the hands of the Malitia mob. This was the pattern for us in Diamond, to stand as a sheep dumb before out-shearers, and like Christ, say not a word when they revile us. We soon heard that Dimmock was shot, trying to get out of the city by the guard. This was, however, one corrected by the truth, that he and 4 or 5 others had fled among the Indians. This was good news, for we wished him to save his life, for we were sure if he was in Far West, and the enemy to find him, he must die. For his taking that gun from the man hunting cattle, his being constable and known by nearly everyone in the country, also his having been in the Crooked Rive battle, and many other things he had done, which gave the mob an eternal and bitter hatred towards him, we thought he must be sure to die by the hands of barbarous, cruel men, if they could see him. In about 8 or 10 days from the surrender of Far West, we were visited in our turn by a portion of this host of unparalleled, in human form, to the number of 8 or 10 hundred. The day on which they arrived, by the request of some of our leading men, they camped out of the city and on the other side of the river, to stay until the next day, and none to disturb us until they came over to receive our arms. As there had been a great many things plundered by us which were taken in our houses, we thought it good to get one night to get it all out of our houses to a general place of deposit. Therefore nearly all the brethren were employed in taking all plundered property to a general plunder depot, that they should now know who had this man's or that man's, and thereby, perhaps, save some lives. This employment lasted until daylight. Morning came, and some of the officers of the enemy came with it to keep up a kind of an honorable appearance, and have all things understood and ready for the reception of the enemy. As we were, the best and only thing that could be policy was for us to be as sociable, innocent, and as ignorant as we knew how to be. Accordingly, this was the course pursued by all the brethren. At the appointed hour, the brethren were at Lyman White's new block building, not finished, where also all the plundered property was stowed, and about the same time the army made its appearance, and as I was not yet with the men, I on one side of the road, and they on the other 1/4 of a mile from me, I was already separated from them by the long line of horsemen when I started. Yet not afraid, I went to the road, and walked along with the line of marching cowards, one of whom I recognized as having seen before somewhere, and who immediately began to ask me what had become of a certain lot of cattle and sheep in a field close by our house, only 2 days ago, and whose they were, and like questions. But of all such things I was very ignorant just then, and consequently could give no satisfactory answer. Upon which he drew up his gun, and I think he cocked it, yet will not say, and swore he would shoot me if I did not tell the truth, and tell where those cattle were. I still professed ignorance, but got out of his way as soon as convenient, for I was alone, and did not know what he might do. I had a little fear he would shoot, yet I was not scared as I have often been when alone and no one near me, but had a kind of dangerous feeling. I walked slowly and fell back, but others seeing me a small boy thought they could get something out of me, but they all failed. About the time I got where the men were, the army had pretty much all passed, but some of Neil Gilliam company, Davies County men, who were all painted, every one according to his own fancy. As soon as they became scattered enough to allow me to get across the road, I was among the brethren and felt safe enough. The army passed on a little way farther and formed a hollow square in a corner of the prairie. I got some old guns, and with the rest of the condemned Mormons like a flock of sheep, were conducted into the pen by a few officers, and there we formed another hellish like beings I ever saw. At the word of command we all turned inward face and lay down every man his own personal arms, except some few that were hidden, and then forward marched, in single file off from the ground. Whilst in the pen we stopped and stood a few minutes, just long enough to cast one good look all around, and throw one candid reflection upon our real condition. And though not one of us to 10 of them, had it been the word of the Lord, every heart would have seized that moment, without doubt or fear, to show forth the power of God, and to gratify nature. One little incident, as we started to march off from the ground, or as the arms were laid down, the one immediately followed the other. One man attempted to retain and secrete a pistol, but as all eyes were that way, he was easily detected, and in an instant several rifles were aimed, and a cry from some of the officers stopped both parties from farther operations. A young man by the name of Ezekiel Megan, before our surrender, went and dressed up as nice as possible, with white gloves and white hat. He made a fine appearance, which attracted some considerable attention from the mob. I say mob because I consider all their proceedings according to mob law, although acting under executive authority, insomuch that they began to talk to him for being a Mormon and for not leaving them, that he was too likely a looking man to be there, and already a home was provided for him. When to their astonishment, they found he was not a member of the society, and nothing to do then, but he must leave. But he stood for the Mormons, declaring he never wished to live with better people. This little occurrence gave a great many quite favorable opinion the Mormons, and opened the eyes of others to look for themselves. The place where we lay down our arms was in the valley of Adamondiaman, where Adam blessed his sons. It was a most glorious and joyfully handsome prairie of 2 or 3 in length, and in full view of the ground, when both Adam's altar and tower once stood. Only a few trees were between us and the altar, yet all 3 places were just on the edge of the prairie. After our surrender, we were conducted in front of the army to the fence in the woods, by the side of which we were put under a guard, and to be for the purpose of keeping us from any insult or injury that might otherwise happen from the soldiery. This was done, I suppose, from the request of some of the brethren, but this did not entirely preserve us, yet it was something for us. We were soon in a solid pen, the fence on one side, and devils on the 3 other. This was about 11 o'clock, and we were kept there until about night. I was unconscious of any fear or dread at that period, and was altogether swallowed up in the strangeness and novelty of the scene, and being small was unnoticed by anyone, yet noticed everyone, for I had nothing to do but stand and look on, as there was no use of my being there for the sake of being there and seeing. We had not been surrounded long with greedy eyes and swearing mouths, when in steps a man past the guard and lifts his gun over a brother's head. G.D. Your soul, you stole my little wheel, and now I am going to kill you. Attempts to strike. His gun is caught hold of. He attempts to shoot. His gun again seized, and he put out of the ring by the guard. Still looks on cursing and threatening all the Mormons. Next, my attention was attracted by a man who was going along looking at and scrutinizing every one, and saying he wanted to see, to just get sight, was all he asked of a man who rode up to him one day as he was hunting cattle and took his gun from him. He said if he could get sight of him, he should know him, and would be put to death, without question. He told the story just as I had heard it from Dimmock, so that I knew who he wanted, and I thanked God the person was far away among the Indians. Several other similar scenes occurred during the afternoon. But a few weeks before, and but a few rods from this same place, I first formed a knowledge, and took the first mystic step in the new and unknown bounds of the brothers and ites of Dan, entered an apprentice in the divine brotherly union, and ended at the same time, or rather that was my first and last step, on account of our breaking up there, and our removal from the state. This society of Danites was condemned by the public like the rest of Mormonism, and there was a great quandary about the Danites, all over the county and among the army, but who and what they were no one was any wiser for anything they heard. And as many stories were in circulation, the most horrid and awfully distorted opinions their minds could imagine, and they all thought that every depredation was committed by the Danites. Danites, awful Danites. Every mobber was afraid of the thoughts of one of those awful men. And if they were to see a man of their own acquaintance, and were told in confidence he was a Danite, they would even shun his company and conversation. Such being their opinion and belief of the Danites, and we knowing it, concluded to make the best of it. So every mysterious trick and bold adventure which had been transacted was planned upon them, and everybody knew there had a company of Mormons fled to the Indian territories, for they were pursued by their trail, and they, it was stated, were the Danites, a most daring band of braves, who were bound together like the Masons. Thus, they became, in a great measure, the scapegoats of the people, bearing off every charge, unless it was personal. But it was not long after that, the surrender, before a charge came against Father by Adam Black. But Father so successfully smoothed it over and cleared it up they were afterwards on good and friendly terms. Black brought with him Major Davis and Dr. Carr, another officer of the army, as witnesses and counsel, but so effectually removed their suspicions that they thought the most honest man on earth. And after that, Davis and Carr brought their rations to our house and ate at the table with the family, instead of quartering with the army, which was camped not more than 40 rods from the house. This brought us into great repute on both sides, the one for cunning and good luck, and the other for honesty of heart. And as there was to be a committee of 12 to be chosen from either of the parties, Mob and Mormon, as conferring representatives of the holy body on either of the sides, to do all business with the church and settle all affairs and business in Davis, Caldwell, Clay, and other counties, Father was pitched upon as one. He and Bishop Hale were the most active and had in a short time to do all their business entirely with but one of the other committee. The committee all wore white strips around or hanging from their hats whenever they went on business, that they might be known, for it was very dangerous for anyone to go into the country around or even to their own farms. For all were compelled to live in far west, and a man was liable to be shot if he was found picking his own corn, without an order from some or all of the committees. The treaty, or terms on which we surrendered and gave up our arms, was that we were to have our lives spared and retain all personal property for ourselves, and we were to leave there and move to Far West in 10 days, and from there, according to the governor's orders, we were to leave the state in the spring. We did not all leave Diamond until sometime after the 10 days, for a violent snowstorm soon set in, which made it doubly bad for them to what it was for us, as they were in camp, and we not much better. I started with the first load in a one-horse wagon for Far West, alone, and in a very cold, snowy day, suffered much, and as I started late, did not get through that day, but stopped at a brother's house to stay overnight. But it was a miserable stay, for there were so many women and children that the floor could hardly hold them and allow the men to sit up around the fire. So some were obliged to stay in their wagons, and which was my lot. But my load was principally beds and bedding, so I got as near the middle of all as possible and passed the night after a fashion, sometimes there and sometimes in the house to warm my toes. It was a bitter cold night about the 1st of December, 1838. In a day or two the rest of the family came. I will now return to the night after we laid down our arms, which was a night long to be remembered by all who witnessed the scenes of that night. For no sooner had the army finished their night duties of camp than they repaired to Adam's altar, which is near the house, where the plundered property was stowed. And by the by they had understood what it was, and commenced hooting and laughing at it. And from hooting they got to howling like dogs and wolves, and so continued on howling like dogs, mewing like cats, and alternately cursing and swearing all night, until daylight, and by their noise kept the inhabitants awake, who listened at their clamor with sincere wishes that our persecutors might howl with anguish, even as they then howled in derision. Our curiosity was a little gratified when we came to see them pick out personal property from the confused mass that filled and surrounded the plunder house, for every man thought the property he lost was the best, or at least every one nearly took and claimed the best he saw, that was of the kind he had, so that the poorest property was left to them that came last, and it came like to have ended in an uncivil war. Some, not finding all of their things, proceeded to search our houses, and one man went to the house of Lyman White and claimed one of their beds. Lyman was then at Far West, and on being asked how he knew it to be his mother's bed, said he knew it by the stripes, common bed ticking. They asked him how he knew it by the stripes, as nearly all ticks were striped. Said he used to lay and feel of them with his toes, and knew they run that way. This is one sample of the ignorance of the Missouri backwoodsmen. This Megan I have spoken of had brothers and sisters there that belonged to the church, and they all kept house together. And they had several things taken that they could prove they bought from Canada, among which was a pair of stoleyards their fathers had. Thus everything was at their disposal, and we had no power to do anything, to defend ourselves or our property. Well, some may say, you had no business to steal and plunder their property and drive them off. But remember, they were the aggressors, and commenced upon our innocent and unoffending brethren, and burned their houses, drove off their cattle, plundered their property, raved with plundering, and put to death much as they could. So we thought it no more than right to pay them off in their own coin, which we did as well as we knew how, and be sure we knew how as well as they. On returning to Far West, Father had hardly got into the house. We moved in with Dimmock's family in his house, before he was told that men were in town to take him to jail to keep him from being a witness for Joseph. Father immediately disappeared and stayed in King Follett's cornfield until there was an understanding between him and the committee that he should go about his business as committeeman. Father had not been out of the house an hour before armed men came and searched it from top to bottom for him. We had not been there long before there was an expedition started up to release the prisoners in jail in Clay County. This was where Joseph and Hiram were, and then there was another jail, I do not recollect where, now, where a lot of more common prisoners were held. Amongst this company was William, which caused a great many sorrowful hours to father and mother, for it was a very dangerous undertaking to break a jail and let out prisoners, yet the brethren were determined to try if we were all killed to pay for it. And as W.M. had had as much as one finger in the most of the pies baked he thought he would, or rather he was chosen to dip, in this. Well, they were mistrusted of the design when they had only knocked one man down, and then the key happened to get turned and left them all, but one or two, in with the rest of the prisoners, but I never knew anything like having a brother in jail until after he had been there several days. There is one thing strange, yet no less strange than true. Those that were out of the jail bailed one that was in, out, and he bailed another, and in like manner they all alternately became Kettle and Bale, until they were all out, and then Kettle and Bale left the state. Things passed on in a new and strange way, the same as the whole series of events which I have witnessed since our union with the church. However, in every event there is something instructing, there is wisdom, and there is something tending to break the shackles of false tradition, and to give liberty to the soul to soar from low and groveling principles to a degree of knowledge and honor before unknown, to those brought up in the glare of the present Christian light and bigotry. The brethren were continually hunted and abused by every one that met them out of the city. Many were obliged to live by night and hide by day, in the woodshed that was but little known and little noticed. In the spring or latter part of winter a man came to our house. It was in the dead of winter. Hearing our name and place in mind, and apparently an acquaintance, and asked if Dimmick Huntington's family lived there. We were surprised to see a covered wagon, good, clean, decent-looking man, and so familiar. Finally, he pulled out of one of the cleats on his wagon box, by the side of the hind stake, in which was hollow filled with letters from Brethren Dimmick went with through the wilderness, and are from him, stating his condition, journey, and etc. And this man he had hired to bring his family out of the state. His name was Cleveland, Judge Cleveland of Quincy, Illinois. During all this time Norman Buell was in Clay County, saying good Lord and kind devil, for a time. But the time finally came that he must choose a side. So he chose the master that would give him the most money then, and in whose hands he thought he would be the safest. He even got to the pitch that he would not let his wife say a word in favor of her brethren, and would say all manner of evil of them himself. He was once an elder in the Church of Jesus Christ. Families were moving out of the state all winter, and the same teams returning to bring others, and by the time grass was good, great share of the church was in Quincy on the east side of the Mississippi River. Thus everything was hurried and pushed on, and every string drawn. For the work of the Lord could not lay still, and the saints were destined to be hurried from place to place, and from one sieve to another until they be fully prepared as a bride for the reception of the groom. One day I saw a crowd around a wagon not far from our house, so I ran up to see what was going on. I climbed up and stuck my head over the edge of the box, and the first thing my eyes met was the familiar face of Gideon Carter. And although the cursed, worse than inhuman mob had dug his eyes out with sticks, he still looked like himself. Gideon was killed in the crooked river battle, had a ball hole in his breast, and a large gash of a sword in the backside of his head. He lay on the battleground until the next day or two, when the mob came and buried their own dead, dug his eyes out, and kicked the dirt over him where he had laid until now. The brethren not daring to go that far from home, or for some other, cause I know not what. Although we gained the day and the ground in that affair, yet he was left on the ground, from the cause of its being strict orders not to touch a dead man at all hazards. So they hurried from the ground and did not miss him until a day or two after, when it was not known exactly where he was. And when he was found, he was just as I saw him, in his everyday clothes, and smelled very bad, I say, and was acquainted with all that were wounded both there and at Hans Mills massacre. I'll here state that Joseph, Hiram, and 2 or 3 others were in Liberty Jail, Clay County, P. P. Pratt, and a score of others in Richmond, Ray County. Father's situation compelled us to stay until about the last family that left the place. When we landed at Quincy, which was the general rendezvous of the whole church, we met Dimmick on the bank, and were glad that we had again overtaken him, which was the third time he had started and led the way before the family. We went to his residence, which was a small log cabin on Judge Cleveland's farm, for miles east of Quincy, whither he and the four that came through the wilderness together were directed by revelation or the Spirit of God, and which was the first resting place they found after they started. There was another company of about 15 started a little after they that were also directed to Quincy, not knowing whether to flee or where to stop, until they came there when the Spirit bade them rest. We stayed with Dimmick 2 or 3 weeks when William came from a place called Commerce 50 miles above Quincy, on the river, where he had been living with Sidney Rigdon and was still living there, but came down to let us know that he had rented a house and 5 acres of land for us up there, and that there was the appointed place for the church to settle. Accordingly, in a few days we moved up to a wild, forsaken, sickening place, for it was very sickly there. It was perhaps 3 or 4 days after the prophet had moved to Commerce that we moved. It will be understood that he had been living in the house with Judge Cleveland ever since his deliverance from Missouri dungeons, which I think, but will not be sure, happened before we got out of the state. We should have gone when he did, but Dimmick's little girl lay at the point of death, and we stopped to bury her. William went to living with the prophet before or soon after his removal to Commerce, I disremember which, and stayed there all summer. When we arrived at our new home, we all felt as though a home was good though ever so humble. We want to work with might and main, all of us, to do something towards preparing for the future, and our first work was to plant to potatoes and corn what little ground we could occupy, and after that Father made several thousand shingles to pay the rent and get a little something to live on as we went along. Sometimes we would kill a quail or two, sometimes a squirrel, and sometimes catch a fish, all of which were very plenty, and which helped us to live. We were now very happy that we were out of an enemy's country and in a land of tolerable plenty, if we could only get it. And another means of happiness was that our wants were lessened, and that we had found we could live with a great deal less than we once thought we could, and enjoy ourselves too.